all flux and a torch. It's week 3 of basic training.
It's who I am, a little rare, some sour fare, and some mystery, putting it all together, doing what I do, doing what I do.
Hi, I'm Tamara Berg. Today we are going to venture into the world of soldering. Now I realize this may be scary territory for some of you, but I promise I will guide you. Soldering is one of the most basic techniques in jewelry making. It is also one of the most difficult to master, so we better get started now. We're going to start with some basic terms. When you're soldering, you are attaching metal to metal with heat. Now you may be familiar with working with solder with a soldering iron. That's not the kind of soldering we're going to be doing today. That type of soldering uses soft solder, and soft solder just doesn't work for jewelry making. It's brittle and it's not as durable as silver solder is. Silver soldering is the kind of soldering we're going to do today, and it comes in lots of different forms. The first form is sheet or chip solder. This is the sheet solder. It's cut into little tiny pieces, also known as chips or papillons. The second form is wire solder. And the third form is the form that we're going to be using today, and this is a paste solder. Another difference between the different types of solder is the rate at which they flow, which is referred to as easy, medium, or hard. So you'll use different types of solder for different applications. For example, if you have a piece that has to be soldered in 2 steps, you'll start with hard solder for the first joint. Then when you move on to the second joint and heat your piece up a second time, you'll step down to medium solder, because if you used medium solder both times, your first joint will melt when you do your second joint, and you don't want that happening. The next thing you'll need to know about is flux. Flux is a coating that prevents oxidation. When metals are heated up, if oxidation occurs, it turns the metal colors that you don't want. Flux prevents that. If you're using chip solder, flux has to be painted onto your surfaces. If you're using paste solder, the flux is embedded into the solder. If you're using wire solder, it comes both ways, either without flux or with a core of flux inside the center of the wire. The other thing you need to know about is pickle, and pickle is a strong chemical solution which dissolves flux residue, and it also dissolves surface oxidation. Pickle is a strong chemical, so you also need to have a baking soda bath nearby which neutralizes the caustic acid in the pickle. So now let's get soldering. We are going to be working with a brass disc and soldering to it a sterling silver jump ring. First thing that you need to know about soldering is your joints need to be tight. They also need to be free of any residue, any oils, any dirt, because you want to make sure that that joint stays nice and tight. So I am just getting a little bit of my paste solder. You don't want to use more than you need, because a sloppy solder joint is no fun to clean up. So we're putting just a little bit of our paste solder onto there, and then putting our jump ring on top, and I'm going to add just a little bit more of that paste. I'm using a toothpick to apply this because it just makes it go on nice and clean. So we've got a nice amount of solder on there, not too much, and we're ready to get started. Now, to heat this up with the torch, I'm going to be using the basic small kitchen butane torch. You can also use a propane torch, but it's not really necessary because we are using easy solder. So let's stick with the easy thing and use the kitchen torch. Do have a fire extinguisher nearby because we are working with flame. So I'm just going to light up my torch here. And we want to heat up all of our pieces at the same temperature rate. So not only the brass pendant, but also the jump ring are getting heated up at the same time. And pretty soon our solder flows, and there is our solder joint. Now I'm setting aside my torch. I'm going to pick up my piece of coarse with tongs, and I'm going to quench it in the water over here. Very satisfying. Then this piece is going to go straight into the pickle. Now pickle does work at room temperature, but it works faster when it's heated. In our studio we have the pickle in a heated ceramic pot that's on all the time, but we've got it here just at room temperature to make things a little bit easier. So that's going to sit in the pickle for a few minutes. Now I want to point out that even though we were working with brass and silver, we used silver solder. When you're using copper, brass, silver, you're going to use silver solder in all of those applications because copper and brass melt at a much higher temperature and their solders are brittle and really not useful for jewelry making. So we're using silver solder no matter which type of metal we're using. Copper, brass, and silver all get silver solder. When we're working with gold, it's another story. It gets gold solder. You might be wondering what the surface is that we're soldering on, and this is just a garden paver stone from the hardware store. You might recognize it from the Jib Bob Star episode. When we were doing the Jib Bob Star, we were firing with a torch for a very long time. This was a much quicker work with torch, but we do still want something that is very heat resistant, very heavy, very big, and is going to protect all the surfaces around. Paver stones work great for that. So after your soldered piece has been in the pickle for a few minutes, you can take it out and check it to see if the oxidation level or lack of oxidation level is where you want it. Notice that I am using copper tongs in the pickle because this pickle is nothing like the pickles that you eat at home. This is a caustic chemical. Copper does not react to it, but it is very harmful to your skin. So we're going to pull our piece out of the pickle and just rinse it real quickly in our baking soda water, and now it is safe to handle. Now your piece will either come out with a little or a lot of oxidation. This one's looking pretty good, but the next step will be brushing with a stiff brush. I often use a wire brush, a brass wire brush. Then you're going to be sanding and filing and polishing until you have a finished piece, and I have made some very flashy, very sparkly, very pretty earrings. And now that you know how to solder, you can make something too. Now you've got the firepower and the knowledge. Okay, you recruits, get out there! Make something beautiful. I'll see you next time.
To get step-by-step instructions, download this week's design guide.